So, Dave, tell us about yourself. Who are you?
Well, I'm an executive assistant at a major pet products company.
Dave, I don't want you to tell us what you do. I want you to tell us who you are.
I'm a nice, easygoing man. I might be a little bit indecisive at times.
Dave, you're describing your personality. I want to know who you are.
I don't know what the hell you want me to say.
This scene is an excellent example of the fundamentally ungraspable nature of the subject. Dave's inability to put his essence into language unconsciously reveals his internal self-division. It's because Dave as subject, who he is an empty form of identity that he can only try in vain to pick out certain contingent details from his life and personality to answer Buddy's question.
I feel alone. Baby, say my phone. You say me no. Why did you go?
The first impossibility of subjectivity can only be understood after one has split the subject in two: form and content. The primordial alienation of subjectivity is not between itself and the other individual, but between itself and its own content. The subject is pure form. It has no substantial content. To describe something means to step back and put this thing within a referential totality. That is what description and definition is. But how do we describe the very means by which we describe? The problem here is one of meta-language, which is fundamentally impossible given the nature of perspectivity. In aphasis, I take the Žižekian assumption that the subject is literally empty, a void of self-relating negativity. I think there's a genuine way to argue down to the possibility of this being, but it will necessarily lead you to hell. In any case, I'm obviously not the first person to divide the subject in two. This is something we've seen all throughout modernity. Dostoevsky referred to the form as the ungraspable foundation of consciousness. Kant referred to it as transcendental apperception. Sartre referred to it as the pre-reflective cogito, and Zizek refers to it as the pure S of self-relating negativity. While the details of each of their respective conceptions may differ, the essence remains the same. The form is the element of ourselves that can't be brought within a consistent totality. In a paradoxical way, that which we can't totalize is our own selves. The subject's inability to know itself is a function of its very being. It's necessarily behind every thought, so that it's impossible to jump behind itself to see itself in its finitude. Knowledge implies both a knower and its object, a distinction between the two. The I, however, is the absolute overlap between these two things. Thus, the subject's identity is never known, it simply is. The subject cannot know itself. This is the first impossibility of subjectivity.
Don't try to kill me, don't try to kill me.
Now, we've defined the subject as a self-relation, a pure self-relation. This is the very being of the subject, its drive. The universality of this self-relation requires the active expulsion of the other. This is the impossibility of intersubjectivity. As a living empirical being, the self encounters other selves quite often, but this is a radical scandal.
To encounter another subject is something ontologically impossible and an ultimate scandal. Why? Because for Hegel, and he is right, each of us as subject, Selbstbewusstsein, is absolute. The most radically new thing is not to discover an alien or whatever, but to say, fuck it, another self-consciousness. It cannot be.
The presence of the other is a radical scandal for universal subjectivity. The other undermines the very mode of being of the self-relating subject. Thus, there must necessarily be a mediating structure which allows for the physical presence of the other individual deprived of its otherness. Who you are must remain a mystery. Who I am, even more so. I'm even tempted to say that the phenomenon of embarrassment exists exclusively as a symptom of this dialectic of hidden knowledge. I think an embarrassing moment is synonymous with the undesired revelation of oneself or another person as a subject who fundamentally does not know. And the answer to the question, what is it we don't know, is who we are. We get embarrassed when we think the other knows something about us that we don't know, and fundamentally, that thing we don't know is our own selves. This is the essence of embarrassment. So you now see that we're not dealing with Kantian finitude, the person that we're divided from, the other in its universality qua formal subjectivity. This person transcends their bodily finitude. The other person is not a mere phenomenon within the mind, not a mere representation. The subject is irreducible to its physical or even psychic components. This fundamental mystery of the other is the subject of self-relating negativity. This subject necessitates the aforementioned mediating structure that allows for the presence of the other person without its otherness, its I-hood. We call this perspectival hierarchy. The subject is aware of the empirical existence of the other, yet it can only encounter the other through the mediation of a self-posited perspectival hierarchy that reduces it to a partial subject. This partial subject is a being whose self-relation of identity is lacking, able to be subsumed into the singular subject's consciousness as a slave. The subject experiences itself as the highest or universal figure within perspectival hierarchy. Dostoevsky says that the essence of reflection is the failure to grasp one's primary cause. This primary cause is oneself. I engage in reflection and try to grasp myself, but ultimately that very act is the catalyst for the arrival of a new me with my own infinite depth. The impossibility of absolute knowledge concerns the impossibility of reconciling with oneself as finite. We can never become ourselves. You can't freely reach a point where you are truly the same yesterday as you were before. This is proven to be the most difficult impossibility to either overcome or at least provide an explanation for. I don't think it would be proper for aphasis, which is salvation, to simply be one final thing or state. I now think we become actualized as infinite creativity through communion with God, and this is the essence of absolute knowing. In any case, the third impossibility of subjectivity has to do with the inability to reconcile with oneself as finite to truly know oneself. And I must emphasize that all of this is formulated within an ontology of self-relation. Now, Dostoevsky says, why? How am I, for example, to set my mind at rest? Where are the primary causes on which I am to build? Where are my foundations? Where am I to get them from? I exercise myself in reflection, and consequently, with me, every primary cause at once draws after itself another still more primary, and so on to infinity. That is just the essence of every sort of consciousness and reflection. The form of the subject, the I, it can never reconcile with itself and truly become what it is. In the book, I make the connection between subjectivity and time, which I think is crucial. They're both homologous to one another. From my relatively newfound orthodox perspective, I think there has to be a connection between the infinite presence of God as communion and the infinite potential of the human person. It's almost as if the human person was made for infinite communion with an infinite God. In any case, the impossibility to truly become present to oneself, to become oneself, this is the impossibility of absolute knowing. Now, we could just end with these antinomies, but there seems to be a certain pattern here, something quite coincidental. Is it not true that all three impossibilities can be inverted into the three essential elements of subjectivity? Is not the very essence of subjectivity self-knowledge, communion with others, and identity over time? Thus, the three impossibilities of subjectivity are not merely random paradoxes. They are a description of the very fallenness of the subject, its inability to embody its notion. The subject is not what it is.
This is our song. That's for you. Girl, just forgive me.